There's a half moon gasket at the back of the head. I forgot to put that in. Welcome back to Millennial, where this time we take Mitsubishi Mighty Max and get it ready for the 24 Hours of Lemons Southern Fried Heaps rally, which will take place in March of 2022, which, depending on when this releases, may not be very long from now. Or actually, it may have been a few weeks ago. Who knows? This is my 1988 Mitsubishi Mighty Max that I bought from a friend of mine about 6 or 7 years ago. It had been sitting in a yard field for who knows how long. Nobody actually did. Weeds were up to here-ish, nothing but flats, hadn't been running. I was like, that's neat, what's that? We had a short conversation about it, and I'm like, let me own that. So I bought it, pulled it back to the shop, tore it down, rebuilt it, drove it for a year or two, sold it to my cousin, who then drove it for several years, broke it bad, and I bought him a car, which we can introduce y'all to that another time. He gave this back to me. So I needed a thing to take on this silly little adventure that we're planning. We're like, why don't we do the Max and slam it and make it absurd, because it already kind of is. I mean, look at this paint. So what we're gonna be doing today is getting the engine put back together the rest of the way. It's most of the way, but I will explain later on. And getting it driving. We've got parts to clean up, components to reassemble, and we're gonna take you through all of that process, doing a small amount of explaining, a whole bunch of showing, and seeing where it would go. We have a table of parts. Last night, I took the intake manifold, which was one of the nastiest pieces I've worked on in a long time, the thermostat housing, serpentine belt pulleys, and the fan shroud. Tossed them in the media blaster, which is a phenomenal tool. Most people aren't going to have it. It's not necessary. You can do almost all of this same amount of work with a wire brush. I used a media blaster because a friend of mine has one and lets me have access to it, but you don't have to have it. Occasionally you may run across tools and conveniences that are around here that either I have gathered over a long period of time or other friends will let me have. None of them, almost none of them are necessary. The vast majority of all of the work that I've ever done has been done with basic Harbor Freight hand tools. As a matter of fact, that's what this one is. Nope, never mind, this is a Stanley. And you can do it by hand. Anybody that tells you that you can't is lying to you, because at some point we didn't have power tools or fancy tools. Everything was done by hand. Don't let that discourage you if you don't happen to have a lot of resources at your disposal. Everybody starts somewhere. But the purpose was to get them really clean. I'm gonna take them and shoot a coat of cheap $1 a can black rattle can paint, mostly just to keep it from corroding over time. Also, it'll make it look a little bit better. The intake and the thermostat housing are aluminum. I'm not gonna bother painting those. Aluminum doesn't rust under most circumstances. We have a couple of cups that have bolts that have been soaking overnight in this right here. It's like $1 at the Dollar Tree. It's lye based. It's one of those as seen on TV things. The first thing that it says on the list of things that it cleans is blood. If it will clean blood, it will clean anything, and it's cheap. You can soak stuff, you can spray it on greasy things, agitate it. It's a really good cleaner. Another good thing that you can use for cleaning up greasy parts, just to make sure you do it like with a mask and in a well ventilated area, is at the same like Dollar Tree or your local actual dollar store, oven cleaner. That stuff is harsh, but it cleans really, really well. Just good pro tips for being able to do stuff without spending a whole bunch of money. We have parts to put on. We have a full gasket set that came off of eBay from somebody. Exhaust manifold gasket, intake gasket, 2 different styles, thermostat gasket, cam seals, valve cover gasket. We're just gonna replace all this stuff because we've got it. Generally, it's cheaper to just buy a whole set, and that way you get fresh new everything, and you don't have to worry about, well, should I or shouldn't I keep this old seal? That way you can minimize the amount of nasty leakage you've got. Because nasty leakage is never a good thing in any context. Moving on. All right, so the Mitsubishi Mighty Max is a collaborative sort of model that was used. It was designed and developed by Mitsubishi in its entirety. It was also sold as a couple under some badge engineering through a deal that Mitsubishi had with Chrysler at the time, which is where the DSM name comes from. This is not a DSM, but it was a model that was sold at other dealership, at Chrysler dealerships under other names, like the Arrow, the Plymouth Arrow, I should specify, and the Dodge D50. All the same vehicle. They were just this little pickup. This is the second generation. There was an earlier one that's much more angular, I should say. It uses a 2-liter inline-4 Mitsubishi engine that's really, really robust. This particular one uses the 2-liter, which is the 4G63 family. Hear, if you will, the dulcet tones of a Porsche 928. 2-liter Sirius family engine, which is the same family of engine that includes the 4G63, which is a relatively legendary engine within the import tuner community. There's lots of people that have built them to make absurd amounts of power, and people still use them in DSMs and Lancer Evos. This engine model isn't a 4G63, it's a G63B. It's the same bottom end with a different head. Not going to go off farther into the weeds than that, because you can either Google it or you don't care. If you do want to know and you just want to listen to me ramble about engines, that's fine, just let me know. This engine needed reassembly. He ran it hot, it blew a head gasket and got some bad information, and then ran it some more, which melted the head. So if you'll notice, I don't know if you can see or not, but there is a nice shiny brand new cylinder head in there. I've gone ahead and put that on. It's a really, really simple process. You get the block clean, set down your gasket, set the cylinder head on top of it, stagger your bolts or studs, depending on what your setup happens to be. You start from the middle and you work your way outwards, doing what's called stepping. So you go to, say, 30 pounds and then 50 pounds and then 80 pounds. The intention here is to make sure that you are applying even torque pressure across the whole piece so that you don't end up bending anything. You want a nice even pressure holding the cylinder head down. I've already done that. It's a fairly boring process. I'll show y'all on something else at some point. But as you can see, I mean, this valve cover's not even sitting on it. Wow, that needs cleaning. We're going to be getting that cleaned up the rest of the way. Sit. We will make sure that the valves are set correctly. We're going to be changing the timing belt because it's the original one that I put on it when I built this engine 5 or 6 years ago, and an untold amount of miles. It's generally something you want to do about every 90,000 miles or 5 or 6 years. And we've got a timing tensioner that needs replacing because the bearing in it has gone bad. It was either on the engine already or it was a cheap replacement that I got because I was, on a budget. Then we'll get the intake manifold put on. We will get the distributor put in correctly, bolt the exhaust manifold up, and once we've changed out all those parts, we should be able to run. But yeah, so realistically, by the end of the process, we should be able to have the truck running and driving around and start doing light duty testing, and to shake it out to see what else we need to do to get it ready for the rally, because that's going to be a couple of thousand miles over the course of a couple of days, and we really don't want to blow anything up when we're nowhere near home. So yeah, let's move to the interior. Take 93. Welcome to the interior of this extremely 80s truck. It's very simplistic. It's all hard plastic. It's got a really nice, simple dash. Unfortunately, it lacks like, for whatever reason, auto manufacturers do, if you have a manual stick, they go, oh, you don't want a tachometer, but you do, but they don't give you one. You got an auto, they'll give you a tack. It's backwards to me because I want to see my RPMs, but they don't ask me. But it's got a really nice flat, big numbers, easy to see, easy to read, space for a double DIN radio, which it will get. I've got a box full of radios up on the shelf that I have just accumulated. They're just cheapo radios. You know, if you don't throw away stuff, you end up with stuff. And sometimes it's useful. A lot of times it's not, but sometimes it is. What we've done in here is strip the carpet out, obviously. This stuff right here, this silvery stuff, it's a product called King Cool or Rad Cool or whatever. What it is, it's home AC ducting insulation. Wherever you live, in whatever part of the country or other countries, you can get it at home improvement stores. It's not terribly expensive, and it does the majority of the same work that Dynamat does without having spent $500 on Dynamat. This cabin is mostly stamped sheet metal, and it, like most old low cost things, it made a lot of just road noise, and from the body panels would vibrate. What this does majoritively will eat up all that vibration. So when we're going to put a new carpet in here, make it fairly livable, we're fabricating brackets. I've got these old racing style bucket seats that I got off of a friend of mine years ago. They've been sitting up on the shelf. I bought them with the intention to use them on one thing and then never did. And I was like, I'll use them on another thing, and just kept going down that line until I just never did. So we're going to use them here. I've got some old metal tubing. It's 1 inch by 1.5 square metal tubing that I'm going to use to cut and weld together to create seat brackets. That way we can be safe and secure. If we get froggy, we may do something about these ugly door panels that have been beat up and cut up, and this armrest is kind of broken. So I may try to make something. I don't know. Never done that before. The truck has a very Southern California in the 80s paint scheme on it, and so I'm really leaning into that and letting the truck really embrace the 80s mini trucking vibe. It's been lowered some. We're gonna get it as low as we can, as cheap as we can. So drop blocks and cut springs it is. But all right, cut the butt. Nah, don't worry about it. Let's get to work. So as you can see, I have a professional paint booth. This is, I don't know, Lowe's maybe? Literally $1 a can. Not everything has to be super expensive. Now, there's a trade-off. Yes, it's cheap. No, it's not going to hold up to a lot of abuse. I don't really need it to on this particular stuff though. Fan shroud, you're not going to beat on it. It'll get vibrated, sure, but largely what we're doing is just making the colors match and giving it a rust inhibitor. So we're just gonna give it some good coats of just cheap matte black paint and then stuff it in the truck, because that's all it needs. That's all it needs. I am by no means a professional, and half the time I do it wrong anyway. Allegedly, you're supposed to get a sort of a light coat to start with and then build up from there. You know, I always start off doing this the right way, and then I get impatient and then just lay the paint on. I'm just going to start off with getting the timing belt and timing belt tensioner off, replaced with some new units. It's real simple. You take your 10mm Allen to loosen the spring, and then you take your, was it 12 millimeter? 14. 3/8 drive to break loose the retainer bolt. And then you can just unbolt the tensioner. All right, so tensioners, you just lift them up, take the tension off, ease the belt off, ease the tensioner back down because it's under spring pressure, and then pull your belt off. And then this one, throw away. Actually, don't do that. You want to make sure that your new one and the old one are the same size. Do not use tools to pry on. They have to put that on the belt so that they don't have any excuse for when you don't listen to them?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I straight up just used a tool to pry on the pulley. All right, so I'm gonna give you a quick rundown of inspecting your timing belt. This is the new one, this is the old one. When you're looking at these, you want to take a good look at them, and on this one, there's not any real cracking. They can get to looking a lot like a dry rotted tire. You'll see it at the, you can see some splitting sometimes at the base of these lobes, or just dry rot cracking running in between them. And most of the time you'll see the cracking show up on the bottom before you see it on the top. So it can be a little bit tricky if you just take a cover off and then look down at it and go, oh, that looks fine. Well, it may not be. General rule of thumb on timing belts is you want to change them 90,000 miles or 5 or 6 years, because they can simply age. Even if you put a new one on and the car sits up for years, you may want to change it anyway. Just on a lot of engines, disc comes apart, then your motor gets trashed. Take a look at them, and then when you get your new one from the parts store, because a lot of times you'll find that their parts are boxed wrong, just pick them up, line them up next to each other, and if they're pretty bad close, then it's the right one. There's probably going to be a little bit of difference. The old one will probably be just a hair bigger than the new one because they stretch. And that's why you have the tensioner, is as the belt stretches, the tensioner moves and maintains appropriate tension on it. And if you do change one out that looks real good, you can keep it in a box as a emergency backup spare in case you have to do it. And you're waiting on a new one, you can do that. Just don't expect it to suddenly be new because it'll sit in a box for a while. All right, we have our new tensioner. Come down in here, and that's just tight enough that we want to take our 14, run our bolt out real quick. All right, the bolt is out, but it's got pressure held on it because it's under tension. So now we're going to take our 10 millimeter Allen, pop, pull that out. All right, so we've got our old one out, and I don't know if you can hear, but the bearing makes some racket, and it doesn't feel, it's got a little bit of a bumpy feel to it. You can feel the slack in it. It hadn't failed yet, but it was going to. So we're just going to drop our new one back in place. Come on. I do this without pinching my damn thumb. There we go. Yep, there we go. All right, new tensioner. Stay where you're supposed to. This is kind of difficult to do one-handed. Timing's done. It's in gear. All right, good enough. Everything rotates, nothing hits, so we're all good. Now we get bolts clean for the exhaust manifold. I'm just going to clean the grunge off of them, run a tap across them, make sure the threads are real clean so it runs up real nice. I'll do the same thing for the intake manifold bolts. Then we can bolt the exhaust manifold on, bolt the intake manifold on, put the distributor in, hook the fuel line up to the carburetor, verify that everything is together, clean and get the valve, well, we'll do the valve cover later. We want to spin it without any, without the coil wire hooked up, because we want to, since it's been sitting for a long time and it's a new cylinder head, we want to spin it over plenty to build oil pressure within the engine so that when we do fire it off, it doesn't have that first few seconds of running oil starved. Just a good general policy to protect your cam and all of your internal bits. Doesn't specify. Okay. All right, so we're getting ready to put the exhaust manifold back on. And it's good that we took all the time to chase the threads on these to get them really good and clean. We can just run them in and out. Now, when you're fooling with stuff like this, it's a good idea to take a little blue Loctite. You want the blue stuff because you may want it to come out at some point. And just put a little, it doesn't take much, just a little bitty run on there. And then have a nut on there so that you've got something to tighten against. And then you just thread it in. And then once it gets to the bottom, once you get it all the way in, you're going to just turn it in and get it good and snug. Rinse and repeat. You know, there's got to be an appropriate height for vehicle where bending over, it's not such a huge pain in the butt. Like, you can be bent over, but not like too much. Then it can't be too tall, or else you can't reach anything. We get the nuts off the studs, set the gasket on. Make sure we've got enough washers. Bolt the exhaust manifold up. Exhaust manifold gasket. Lock washers. Nuts. You can tell which way it goes because it goes the other way. It's like all up in the valve cover and stuff. Yep, appreciate that. Come on now. Actually do find this quite entertaining. It actually is fun. But just because something is fun doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. And just because something is simple doesn't mean that it's easy. And that is okay. Most things in life worth doing are worth putting in the effort to do them. I really don't know why they decided that this needed a heat shield. It is awfully in the way. I'm sure that there is some kind of specific order that would give you the most even application of pressure here, but I'm more or less just trying to keep it fairly balanced left to right. When in doubt, consult the torque specs. Just get everything snug, and then check the book or website or whatever. I figured this would be a good opportunity to explain a couple of different types of torque wrenches. They both work very well. It really just comes down to your personal preference. You have a bending beam style, which is more old school, and then your more modern click type. Most people, I would guess, are more familiar with the click type, where you thread the base up to the torque reading that you need, lock it in place with the lock screw, and then you bend, and whenever you put it the appropriate amount of torque threshold, you'll hear it click, and you can feel it break a point. It'll kind of jump just a hair. That's way you know you're done. They're a little simpler to use in a way. They give you a more tactile feedback of you have reached your predetermined point. Whereas with a bending beam, as you twist the head, you will notice the pointer rod move, because it's going to stay more straight than the lever rod. And so you simply have to watch for when you reach the appropriate point. They both will work fine. Just depends on how you want to do it. Okay. Exhaust manifold is in, so as far as we're concerned for tonight, the exhaust system is done. Now we'll move over to the other side and get the intake manifold put on and the fuel lines hooked up to it. Then maybe we just go ahead and see if it'll crank. All right, so we're gonna put the intake manifold in here. I have went ahead and done us a bit of a favor and put these studs in here. Get that coolant passage on there. It goes like that. So we're going to get I have a pair of pliers around here. Sit. Now, it's not quite done, but that'll hold it in place. So what we want now is our two nuts. No, we don't, because I'm an idiot. Don't forget your gaskets, people. Alright, so that one goes there. That one is going to go there. Oh, don't drop. Come on. What in Sam Hill is this? Semi-burnt butt connector and some twisted together wires going to what looks like lamp cord. Look, that one's not a 13. What do you know? Guess what? That one is. What about you? No, you're a 12. And you're also a 12. Because I'm not replacing all of this stuff. I'm just using what happened to be here. And it's all a bunch of mixed matched garbage. All right, intake manifold is on. All right, carburetor. This This truck uses a Weber, which I probably should have cleaned up, but whatever. It's pretty simple install. That's most of it. There's a few little bracketries that need to go on. This is one of the brackets that holds the throttle cable. You know, I checked these a little while ago just to know that they would thread on nice and easy, so that when I got to this point, this exact thing would not be occurring. In situations like this, your best bet is a little magnetic tray. You can put them anywhere and they'll hold your bolts. This bolt decided to jam itself and remove the stud. This is what happens when you skip a step, because I did not chase the threads on these uprights, and there was a little piece of the glass beading material that I used to blast it stuck in the threads. Oh, this is going great. Because why not? There. This is the question for the ages. Unless that's a shear. That's why the stud is short. This one's sheared off. The rest of it's down in the hole. Great. Okay. This one gets red Loctite. You're getting a bunch. Which is normally not what you want to do. If you're not a tiny Italian man, these are kind of hard to work on. Alright, 1/4 inch drive with extension, with a wobble. Next to the short socket is the move until you break your 1/4 inch drive socket. Or ratchet. Alright, now I have to fetch my one wayward screw that went up underneath, or nut that went up underneath the truck. And the carburetor will be bolted down. Nope. Snug. Alright. Carburetor's in. Funky little thing here. Look. Actually, here, you can look at the clean part. Do N apostrophe T. They could have just put an O. And like over here, you would think, okay, maybe they were doing it because of space. But look at that, the gap between knot and remove. Mitsubishi, what are you doing? All right, so if memory serves, so traditionally these are mounted upright and you point it towards the spark plug that you're going for. This one mounts horizontally, and I believe there is a mark. Nope, that's a seam. I have a book that includes all of this information. I don't like how just dry this is. We're going to put assembly lube on it. Assembly lube is a very tacky, very sticky lubricant. Normally use it for, it's gears, cams, crankshafts, valve train, to give it some slickum before it actually gets oil moved up to it. Wow, that moved a lot and violently. All right, so after consultation of the manual and a little trial and error, I think we got it right. So we're going to lock the distributor in. I'm just gonna snug that up so it can't jump around. Jump around, jump around. Vacuum. Vacuum advance. Now we hook up fuel, which actually, let's get power hooked up. Yep, we got fuel. I thought I'll put a fuel pressure regulator on this truck. Matter of fact, I was fairly confident that I did, because Webers are extremely fuel pressure sensitive. Okay, for the purposes of just testing, we have carburetor, we have fuel. I want to get this where it's not going to get caught up all up in the valve train. You know, the one flat blade screwdriver I have is just a little too big. All right, we're going to have to hook we will just have to put the valve cover back on, because the spark plug wires run up and over. That's okay. That's okay. So this goes on just like that. Okay, now I see the problem in my plan. We're just gonna send it. No, we're not. We're gonna do it right. This doesn't make any sense. This isn't gonna run. Oh, this is gonna be wrong. Oh, what a nice sharp corner to cut myself on. And the spark plug wants to be a pain in the butt. It's forced by the cap, okay. That can't be right. The cap being backwards, why you had it. Oh. Let go. To those who don't really know or don't do very much of this, this isn't a terribly big issue. As a matter of fact, they sell build your own spark plug wire kits at your parts house of choice. You just have to you do this little process on each and every wire, which is a really nice way to do it if you need an extremely specific length. But just as easy as that, it's fixed. Clamp these on. See, and this is the trouble. Realistically, if you're ever working on something, and you're going to keep it. If you can buy one, get a factory service manual. They're usually a couple of volumes. If you're buying actual books, it's probably going to be 2 to 4 books. Can be fairly thick, and it will cover everything on the vehicle the right way, because it's what they built the things with. I don't have one for this truck. I have one for my Talon. I don't have one for this truck. And unfortunately, the distributor setup is different because the Talon doesn't have a distributor. We know that 4 is in the back. So number 4 cylinder has to be the longest one. All right. There. 1. Wait. It's 1432. So if that rotor's here, it's going to rotate 1432. So this is 3. 143. This is 2. 2 goes here. There's probably somebody watching that knows what that just knows off the top of their head. Ain't nobody watching this. Nobody knows. You know, what's the chances that those will sit like that and not make a huge colossal mess? This looks like it probably goes somewhere that would result in a giant vacuum leak. Initial test, we're just going to turn the motor over with the starter. It can't pop off because there is no coil wire. It'll probably be fine just sitting there. All right, we're going to test it. It might pop off just a little bit. It shouldn't actually run. I know, I should set it back to top dead center on the compression stroke for number 1. Reset the timing again. We're not doing that. That's kind of 180 from where we were. Yeah, we must not be anywhere close. It's midnight. I'm tired. Pro tip, when you get tired, stop. That way you don't make even more mistakes. So, I'm gonna call it for tonight. Go home, get some sleep, come back with better documentation, set the timing right, and dollars to donuts. I want donuts. This thing fires. Take it easy. Oh yeah, I completely unhooked the cap and then reran the wires.
It's not pointing anywhere close. Make it fire and run.
Get that snug.
Is it loose enough where you can rotate it a little bit? Keep going. What is firing order?
According to the websites that I was looking at, because I don't have my damn book, 1342.
All right, bump your starter and let's see which direction it rotates. According to the cap, it goes this way. It goes clockwise. So it's supposed to be
1342.
1. It was 1342.
According to this, but I'm trying to find other.
Yeah.
All right, this is like the fifth website that says that it's 1342.
1, and it goes clockwise.
I'm not saying that many websites can't be wrong, but it fired off. Thank you. Okay. All right, so as we've seen, it starts. Unfortunately, it is full of this chocolate milk oil, which is not good. We know it'll run. We're going to get the valve cover cleaned up, put its new gasket on, get it mounted, and then change the oil. Stealing your nice rag. Which I can now no longer. Ah, gross. Anybody want some chocolate milk? Easy now. Easy now. Come on. Are we down to just coolant now? I think so. Book says 4.2. We're putting 3 quarts of motor oil, just their cheap regular stuff, and 1 quart of ATF. Because it is kind of nasty in here possibly a lack of oil changes or not using high grade oil. The 1 quart of ATF for this short short change, because we're going to run this for just a few minutes realistically on this oil, and it'll help clean it. The ATF is fairly it's rough, and it's got a bunch of detergents and stuff in it that'll help clean the oil passages and everything out, which we really want given the fact that it had so much water in it. Things never go the way you want them to. That's just kind of the way life is. Sometimes you just gotta lay there and wait. And just one hand tight, people. You ain't got a hulk up on it. Probably cannot do this without making a mess, but here goes. So like I started pouring this in, and then the top layer was nice good oil, and this crap was underneath it, and I don't know what all that is, but I'm not putting it in an engine. So we're just gonna dump this in the barrel and run some good used motor oil for, you know, because that makes a lot of sense. At least it will look like a motor oil. Good black, heavily used motor oil. This is what I was talking about. You can just put ATF in an engine. I would never do more than 1 quart for the whole thing, because it's not the right viscosity, but it is extremely slippy. So it won't be a quart per 4, at least in the small scale. Shouldn't be able to hurt anything. All right, we're about halfway up, and we're well into the safe zone. I'll add another little bit out of that other bottle of used oil, because I want it really good and full. Also, it will be reading high because I did not fill the oil filter, so the oil filter will take up a bit, so we actually want to overshoot it a little bit to make sure that it ends up with the correct amount of fluid, and see how it does. And see, actually what we're going to do, instead of cranking it and running it on that, I'm going to pull the coil wire so that the engine can't fire, and I'm just going to spin it to build oil pressure without running it, because I want it to fill all of the oil journals and fill the fuel pump without running, given that I want to try to flush all that crap and get, you know, actual oil going through the system before we fire it off. The oil light never went out. Generally speaking, when you're doing this, you're going to spin the engine over until the oil light turns off. What that is, the oil pressure switch will detect that you have built a sufficient amount of oil pressure and break that connection, turns off the oil light. You know that you have a proper amount of oil pressure within the engine. This one didn't do that, and I don't know why. So we're just going to cycle it again and see what that does. There it went. All right, it turned off that time. It just took a little while to fill all the passages.
Hold on. I'm trying to focus, man.
We're gonna let it settle for a minute. Check the oil level. Add any if we need to. We probably will. I suspect it'll be about half a quart low, and then we can crank it and well, probably put air in the tire, and we can drive it outside to fill it with water from the hose. Yeah. About half a quart low. And for those of you that, actually turn wrenches and stuff, before you get all uppity and go, you can't use motor oil, I'm not going anywhere on this. It is literally just to flush the crap out of the system. This used motor oil is better than the water and schmutz that was in it. So, don't actually yell at me. You can yell at me in the comments. Oh, shit. Oh, I forgot a gasket. Not a hard fix. Pull the valve cover, set the little gasket in place, put the valve cover back on. Done. This is why you make a list, people. An actual checklist of every single item. It may take a little extra longer, but you can look and go, oh wait, let me do this before I forget. And you don't end up being like me, having done all of this. This goes right there. All right, engine needs coolant. So it's getting water, not like antifreeze or anything. A, because it's not going to stay in there for very long. It also doesn't have a thermostat in it, so there's not going to be any restriction to it. I'm doing this because I need to clean the inside of the engine block coolant passages. I will be adding a cleaner to the mix later on, and running it a little bit and then flushing the system a couple of times and then adding actual antifreeze. But for right now, water will be fine. Here we go. Here we go. That's not okay. Still not right. I don't know why I have so much trouble with this. Well, it runs, acting like it was dropping a cylinder, but we'll figure out what that is, and she should be good to go. But that'll be good enough for tonight. Peace. You can get out of the car now. Yeah.